you need quite a large space to work. Okay, so all you're doing is because see, it's just a very thin layer. This is kind of like a dye. It'll discolor your bark. If you don't take it off, it's going to go through the material. So you want to be sure to get it all off. So that's what you'll be doing, okay, to all your bark, okay? You want to get this off as soon as you can. In fact, I usually do it in the woods, and I miss that in the woods.
I honestly
Do you live up here?
Is this already the bark staining it?
Yeah, yeah. And it just darkens up naturally too over time.
Don't go too deep because you don't want it to.
So is that where there was a little knot?
Yeah, a little tiny branch. Okay, just leave it.
Yes, I didn't want to make a hole.
No. That one I would just take and,
Rip it off.
yeah. You'll use it, but you'll just.
You want me to just bring it down this way too?
Yeah. But this one, I wouldn't let it go clear down because it's quite a long piece. Look.
It would be nice.
Okay, so I would cut it right there. Still save these, you'll still use those, but cut it right there so it doesn't go any further. Yeah, I would just cut that off. You could use them for little baskets if you want.
So you're cutting out at both ends where it's split?
Where
Is
it's
that
split
right?
like that, because that's what, see, the tree had a little, when she pulled it off, it had that bark right in there, see? When you get through with one piece of bark, be sure to put it back in your plastic bag right away because you don't want it to dry out. The harder, it gets harder and harder to do if it dries out.
Do you ever keep moist rags or moist?
No, you don't
towels
want to
around?
do that. You want the natural nutrients that are in it.
How fast do you need to do this?
It has to be done right away. It's harder, the longer you wait, the harder it gets to do that. So, and the next stage is splitting it, and that'll get harder as the time. That's why you're working against time right now.
Right.
Because it's much easier to do when it comes right off the tree, to split it. So what I usually do is I cut into it, not right at the top, but a little ways down, because then you don't cut yourself.
And it's naturally just gone in half.
Well, yeah, as soon as you see it kind of a little sliver come off, be sure to, like this part here, is see,
You want to get that.
right, be sure to keep equal pressure on each side.
Keep checking that end.
Right. Don't wait to go too far when it does that, when it splits. Go right away to where it's splitting. And you can feel when one side is getting thicker or thinner on each side, and be sure to cut through. It's important to keep each side equal. If it feels like you're putting too much pressure on that side, just turn it around and see feel it, that got thick right through there.
Oh, yeah.
So then you take it and just make a real thin cut there. Okay. And okay, it's getting thick there again too. So you turn it around. Okay, there you go.
You do want to split the bark as soon as you can. It's easier to split when it's straight off of the tree. Once it dries out, it's going to be way harder to split. And after you've pulled it apart, like we've been doing,
Okay. you
even
can
if it
start. I
dries,
think
if you roll it up and
Well,
it dries,
hold it
you can
steady.
then soak that in the water, and then you can pull it through the stripper at a later date.
This side will be your warp, and this side will be your web.
The one that is on the alongside the outer bark that you've split away is woodier. It's not next to the tree with the xylem where the moisture goes up. It is going to be for plating or for warps. And the one against the tree is got more moisture, so you'll twine with it.
Well, usually what I do is I take my warp and I keep it separate from the web.
So show me what you do to start.
Okay, Nani likes to use the smaller side because it's a little bit easier to work with. And you can see where it's starting to thin out up here. I would just go in right through there, just kind of start that way, and then you can start working your way down this way towards the thicker end. So even right here, you'd be able to just put your knife in all the way across. And you just want to try and use even pressure, and if you feel one getting too thin, you just kind of gently pull on the other side to make it even again. This side's really thin already. It's a nice weaving piece already. But if we look on this side, it's a little bit thicker, and it has a natural split where it wants to come apart for that second piece. I would try to just cut this part off, pull it away, and then split this piece. It's got this split in it, so I would recommend, this part is too thick right now to go through the jerry stripper, so I'm just gonna, this is gonna help you splitting it too. And it's already really nice and thin, so you might not even have to thin it out, okay? So that might be why you're struggling.
Okay.
Okay, so the rest of this is really good.
Okay.
You can just send this right through.
Okay.
It does get a little bit thick right here, but that won't be a problem. And see how it's kind of, it's already wanting to come away, that thick part. So we'll just pull that right off, and the rest is good to go. So you can go ahead and coil that up so it doesn't dry out. So feel yours, feel how thin that is, and then now feel how thick this one is.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Feel the difference?
Twice the size for
Right.
sure.
So, and you can see right here and all along the edge there.
Just like that lip.
Yep, that's where it's gonna naturally want to split.
So my length was going kind of thick, thin throughout the whole piece. So some of it I could split, and then I got to a point where it wouldn't let me split it anymore. So Delores is just going through now and picking out sections.
So you're going to have to split these in half again. And they're too wide to go through, so I usually do this down here. That way it goes straighter, see? If you pulled it, then it would just go right to the side.
So some of these lengths of cedar bark, we have now split once,
Yes.
and now we're splitting them again.
Yes, some of them you're getting 3 pieces out of it because it was pretty thick.
Because it was pretty thick,
Thick
this
material.
way. Yeah.
Okay, so put them through that stripper. And always remember, this is the sharp side, because you pull it through the other, you're going to break up your material. Always have somebody work with you, because you don't want it to. And when you put it through the stripper, be sure when you get it there that it's not right to the end, because it'll move over either this way or that way. It's invariably it does that. So you're putting it in the blade and you're pushing it down to be sure that it has caught on the sharp blades, and so you then start pulling. But you have to work fast because this is not stainless steel. It'll oxidize, so you can't leave it sitting there too long. And when you get something like this, you need to stop because it's going to get caught. So be sure to be pulling it, and you'll have to just work along with that. Okay.
Hold it and
Right. Don't go too far away from. Keep moving your hand up.
Oh.
Yeah, keep your hand. Don't put your hand way back there. Keep them close to the stripper. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And keep this straight, because otherwise it's going to break off and go off to the side. And keep it straight with your hand on that side. See, but if it stops, like it just stopped, it means that it's caught. Don't wait too long. Pull it right away. Okay.
This one.
Okay, right. So then, yeah, don't keep pulling at it if it's hard to pull. After every time you go through it, be sure to, because otherwise, if there's bark hanging on it, then it doesn't go through that good. It impedes the movement of the bark. Okay, keep it.
Oh, down.
Yeah, keep it in line with these.
Oh.
You're going to the side, keep it in line. Don't let it go to the side. If it feels tight, then stop, push it down, and look and to make sure that it's not getting stuck there. You might want to plate, so I would use the bigger one. Say you want to plate a bottom instead of
we're doing this one?
Instead of
Yeah.
twining or something?
Yes, then you would use this one.
And this is the part that won't be seen. You're going to weave around these ones, so
When we start bringing it up from the base to the sides and we twine around them.
right.
And how did you distinguish this one?
It's shiny on this side, so this one's the warp, the shinier side. I usually put in about this much, just enough for you to hold on to. And you just tack it down. So the goal is to try and pull it through in one nice motion. Okay. Every time you stop, you run the risk of cutting into your strands. So you want to just pull it nice and evenly as far as you can, and then we'll just kind of keep that motion going. Hold this end here.
Okay.
maybe right here. So I'm gonna pull, you're just gently guiding.
Okay. Got it.
And if it starts to move off to the side, you just kind of gently push it back to the center. So you're gonna wanna come up here and hold it just like this. And having your hands on both sides is gonna guide it through. I'm having trouble pulling this through because it's so wide and it's naturally splitting right here. So I would just take this out and split it all the way down. Shayla just sent her cedar through the jerry stripper, and I was letting her know that on the ends, sometimes it doesn't always come out to the size that you want it, and I just take that off and just use it as scrap. Some people like to use it to make cedar rope, because it's not the same consistency as the other pieces. So right now we're just splitting all of the bark in the jerry stripper, bundling them up, and then once we're done we'll go to the table and do them all individually. I'm not sure if I'm doing this Delores' way, but a figure 8. I'm just gonna wrap around, and then using your longest piece here, just make your loop, okay, and then tuck that underneath. Pull it a little bit tight, and that way it doesn't get tangled, and you can just pull this right out and get started. It won't be a big knot.
Am I putting this back in my bag? Does it stay in
Yeah,
my
until
bag?
you
or
do
am I-
your figure 8s. Yeah, you want them to stay there.
Oh, okay,
So you'll
okay.
do your figure 8. Maybe 80 or 82, I was giving a talk at the Burke Museum. And I mentioned that when my mother died, I probably wouldn't be teaching basketry because it took the two of us to prepare the material for the basketry. You know, we'd gather in the summer and we'd work for 2 or 3 months preparing the material for 12 students. Well, this woman who started the Weavers Guild, I wish I could think of her name. Anyway, she's the Washington State Weavers Guild. She came to me and she said, you know, I do red cedar bark and I use a stripper. I said, a stripper? A leather stripper? And she said, I'll give you one.
Before the jerry stripper, did you use just a small knife to split it? By
No,
hand?
you used your thumbnail. And they had really sharp thumbnails and they would go down like that.
My
red
mom,
cedar.
she
It's
had
they
a
just got
stripper,
too
but I've
dry.
watched her do it by hand, like Delores was saying too.
This is a little different technique than what I grew up with, so it's interesting to learn this style. I learned from my aunt, Lillian Buchert, and we did all of this by hand. We did all of this by hand with the sewing needle, fingernails, and so it's interesting learning this style, and it definitely goes a lot faster. The needle goes in, and it finds its way into those fibers. So it's not cutting anything, and then you can just, once it's in there, you can pull it up, and it just finds its way through the bark, which is just beautiful, and it's an interesting feeling, and you just feel it in your fingers.
Oh, she was such a good weaver because look at her warps and weavers are all the same. And I watched her, you know, she did it like the Ts'msyen people did. She didn't use a stripper. She used her
No, we never used.
thumbnail.
I helped them. I used to
Yeah.
help them. Like
Yeah, she used her
my
thumbnail.
aunt.
Yeah.
So she had a little bone thing I
Yeah.
made for her. So
Oh,
she'd
did you?
use. This
Yeah.
is the only thing she'd use.
Yeah, Flora always used her thumb.
Yeah.
She did start using the stripper when I said, Flora, it's going to save us a lot of time. Do it. The next thing you do is, if you would keep some of them damp, so you get them to weave size, you know, if you would take them like this one, is a little thick, too thick to
Okay.
weave with. So you would take it, and don't try to save it on the end. And if you take it between your fingers, and if you feel it getting thick, like if this side feels like it's getting thin, then pull it.
On the other
on the
side.
opposite side. Yeah.
Keep it even.
Yes, to keep it even. When you decide to split it, just make a cut into it. And it doesn't matter how close you, because you'll get it centered. See, if it starts to get thin in one place, I'll jerk it so that more comes on this one. And sometimes if I jerk it too much, it goes, see, like this went too thin. And if there's this size, I'm not going to like to weave with them, so I keep those for warp. Okay. No matter where they were, if they're that short, then I just go ahead and make warp out of them for the basket. If I'm going to use these for warp, usually I put them in a circle and do the same thing I did with the figure 8, but this lets me know this is warp. Sometimes I just do that so that I know these are sticking out, that's warp. But if you're going to split them, be sure to keep them damp. But if you're going to let them dry out and do them later, then, and if you decide to do them later, you know, you have to soak them. It's really better if you put it in rainwater. Like I said, if it's from the tap, there's too many chemicals, it changes the color right away. But it'll keep it a little lighter. But I like that dark contrast too sometimes, so I deliberately put it in.
So what I'm doing now is actually going through all of the pieces, the lengths that I've stripped, and we have 2 different thicknesses. But what I'm going through now is kind of doing a quality control. So I've taken out from the edges, you normally have these smaller lengths, and we keep these. These are really good as additions later on if you need to add a piece. But what are really nice weavers are these really long lengths. And what you want is you want them all to be the same width as they came through the stripper, and then to take off any issues. So this is the bit that we didn't put through the splitter because you need to have something to hold on to. But with this you can still use it. So you can either use a pin or a needle, or if you've got long fingernails like I have, you can just go through there and split them in half. So then what I want to do with this nice long length is actually at this point try and take out any issues. So what I mean by that is if they're splitting in any way. So you see this little edge here? I'm just going to tease that out. So you don't want to go too far, so if it's starting to take too much off, I'm actually just going to cut it off. But the idea is you want a really nice, long, perfect piece. I'm also checking the thickness. There have been some of the ones that I've now tied that feel like they get too thick when you're weaving. You wouldn't like, it's a bit like beadwork. You want the beads to all be the same size, ideally, just because then you'll get a really nice, even weave. And then also ends like this. This is probably where you would start weaving, where it's the correct thickness, but we're keeping the edges like this where they're kind of feathering off, because it's really good when you weave, and that will be shown when you have to add on. It's quite good for strength to have these kind of overlapping areas.
Annette, I see you have a needle.
I do. It's kind of my tool of choice.
And how do you use it? For what purpose?
For splitting the bark. That's it's just how I was taught.
So
And
it
it's
looks
the
like-
same concept as the paring knife, but you kind of just, it goes in between the fibers, so it does less cutting. you kind of go through the strips and you can feel them. And where they're thick, you can take your needle and kind of thin them out. Just kind of go in there and you thin that area out. You just take a little at a time.
So you're going for a consistent thickness?
Yeah, you want it to be even, and you just kind of run it through your fingers. Sometimes it works. And then you just kind of, this is what I do. I work on my strips by feel, and I just feel the areas that need to be thinned out, and I do that with my needle. Sometimes, there we go. We just pull lightly so it just gets just a little bit of the bark off. And then you feel that's much thinner and workable. And we can do that on the sides as well. If there's an area that is too thick, for example, just put your needle in there and you thin it out that way.
Today will be the last day you can do it. Tomorrow it'll be moldy. So you have to let it dry out. Today will be the day that you make them into pieces.
So this is Jamie's bark that she pulled from the tree yesterday. She sent it through the jerry strippers, and now we have to figure eight all of her strands individually.
Just take it, put it up like that with your
Just a loop, okay.
Yeah. Okay, and you'll catch it with your little finger.
A little finger.
And then you'll go around and then. And the reason you do it in figure 8 is because when you're weeding, you don't have time to try and untangle a knot. So you take it and it usually comes right out. You need to know which side is the one that you'll pull, because if you pull that side, it's going to knot it. So you know that you're going to pull the opposite side.
You just let them air dry. I like to throw all of my figure eights onto a single strand. Every artist is different. I like to let them air dry hanging up somewhere in the house. And how long would you say it would take for the figure eights to dry?
I don't know. I usually have it, dry for 2 or 3 days. Sometimes I dry it outside for 1 day and then take it in for 1 day and then store it, if it's really hot weather.
Okay. And how do you store it once they're dried?
I usually put them in brown paper bags.
Okay. And that keeps the
Because you
moisture
don't
out.
want it in plastic, because if it gets in plastic, it might get damp and then it'll get moldy. And you don't want that to happen.
You store them in a nice dry area. You don't want a whole lot of moisture because they can get moldy. So make sure they're in a nice, warm, dry area.